Hi, everyone. Hope you had a great lunch. Get your coffee in. So today, with Igal, we've prepared a deck, and we had a very specific instruction from Mariusz that has to be custom made for this game camp. So Igal is the main mastermind behind the data. I'm just here to present it. So I think we're gonna start with looking at 1 year into ATT and scan. We will actually go beyond just the normal descriptions about what ATT and what scan is and how you can use it into a bit more specific benchmarks. Okay, very briefly about what AppsFlyer is. We are the measurement partner for by far the biggest market share. That's why we also have the data that can support based on different verticals that we prepared the data for. I think the most important part is that we saw the whole evolution of scan from, as you could probably remember, May 2021 to today, where actually quite a lot of trends emerged from this unified approach. It's like, what the hell is that? How are we going to work with that? To actually seeing some strategies that we will discuss in the next slides. In terms of the data sample on what we're looking at, we're going to have 145 apps in terms of the installs, which gives us a data set that's big enough to be statistically significant, but also small enough to actually have some interesting insights from it. There's going to be non-organic installs and, of course, spend analyzed across different media sources.
Yeah, I also want to add that this specific game camp is not only gaming as it used to be, so there are also finance and e-com companies here. And the 145 apps basically include the top apps out of these three verticals. So also some of the slides are we're going to talk about specific verticals and not all of them combined. So I think it will be interesting for you to see basically how others are also doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. So starting with actually the agenda, so we're going to look at the ATT and scan benchmarks when it comes to the constant rates, when it comes to the actual trends, as well as the conversion value mapping models, which is quite relevant because there are certain differences across the verticals. Then we're going to go into media sources and then the user behavior that changed not only due to the iOS and scan, but also because of the events that I think everyone, not only in the app industry, but worldwide experience, be it the slowdown of the recession or the war in Ukraine, many events that actually also affected our industry. So without further ado, let's start with actual ATT constant rate. And that's a first interesting insight that we found while analyzing the different verticals. We can definitely see that when it comes to the financial apps, the constant rate is much higher globally when it comes to compared to, for example, e-com or gaming. Gaming, when it comes to, as you can see, the purple line, was pretty stable when it comes to the constant rates. Of course, it also varies when it comes to the sub-verticals, so from hyper-casual to mid-core to the hardcore players. The interesting part is the e-com uplift in Q4, which is usually the time where people start buying more, installing more e-com apps. If there's a specific reasoning why actually this cohort of users consented more, we don't know this. We can only assume that basically it could have to do with the specialized offers. Again, I hope that most of you know what IDFA and ATT is, but basically with the consented users, you can get way more information for a longer period of time to collect the data. Okay, so looking another interesting insight is when we look at the constant rate across the markets. So I think the takeaway from the slide is for you to consider your marketing strategies, because this actually varies quite a lot. So starting with the APAC cluster, we see again that the differences might be massive. So just taking the India, which is obviously the market that is quite relevant for many of us, when you look at the compare e-com to finance, we see that finance have 74% constant rate compared to, for example, only 38% when it comes to e-com, and gaming is around 48% of what you can get. Similar to a bit more to markets that are a bit more focused on the iOS. So if you look at the, for example, Korea and Japan, again, the constant rate is a bit lower compared to the less developed countries. Again, it might be, first of all, that the basically the countries that are mobile first, right? Like let's also talk about the African continent, might be more used to having the mobile apps as their first user source. The Western countries or US has been historically based on the web and the PC world before moving into the apps. So moving forward, again, it's okay to take photos and the screenshots of the constant rate. I think the last interesting point to raise here is that keep in mind that those are benchmarks on the country level, and you will definitely find pockets of growth for different subcategories when it comes to gaming, finance, and e-com, right? We can talk about marketplaces, but we have a limited time, so we didn't delve that deep into those. So I'll pass it now to Igal to talk. Yeah, you can have a clicker. To talk about the
Yeah, I also want to
conversion.
add that we are looking in a very high level on concentrates, but when you're going to dig inside the subcategory level, so you're going to see it differentiate much better and much different. And then, each sub vertical has their own strategy and their own way to kind of increase the concentrate, to optimize towards the concentrate. So this is very high level for you also to understand how other verticals are doing it, and also between different sub regions how they're doing it. Cool. Now we're going to move to talk a bit about conversion modes. So most of you, or all of you, know what conversion modes are and how it works. And I basically want to show you how different verticals are doing it and how they break the conversion modes. So looking specifically on finance, we see that the majority of finance apps are using custom encode. Meaning they are manually going into the platform and then configuring their own custom modes. If I want to dig specifically inside the custom mode, so we actually see that when it comes to finance, most apps are looking more at the event side, either events by their own or events as a combination with revenue or with funnel. Another thing that they can do with the custom encode is basically change the attribution window, right? So the default is 24 hours, but when finance apps are configuring the attribution window, still most of them will go with the 24-hour, but some of them are experimenting with 48 hours or 72 hours. And then it comes to what I said earlier about the subcategory. So, I mean, just for example, you can be a money transfer app. So maybe the user is expected to do the money transfer closer to the install, but if you are a lending app, so you want to give the user more time, the bad side of it is that it's going to take longer for you to get the data, right? So it's kind of a lose-win game. Moving into ecom, so still 50% of apps are using custom encode. And when they use custom encode, we see that the focus is actually on revenue. So it's revenue or revenue with funnel, revenue with events. And when I was digging inside those configuration, I actually saw it was pretty clear that they are measuring towards PLTV. And it's something that was, I mean, also gaming can measure to PLTV. We saw it previously in the Pixel presentation, but it's very clear with ecom. When it comes to the attribution window, so still we are looking, most of them are looking at the 24-hour default window, while some are still experimenting longer or even shorter in some cases. Now, gaming is a completely different game, right? So when it comes to gaming, and we know that gaming advertisers are very savvy compared to other verticals, and we see that a quarter of them are measuring into custom decode, meaning they actually upload the CSVs, they're doing it more automatically, and it's basically also faster than do it with the custom encode. And also 24% are measuring towards revenue, while we saw in e-com and finance, it was about 10%. Now digging into the custom encode, and we did it with these three subcategories. So you can also see that on the subcategory level, they actually act differently. So while hyper-casual apps, you don't see a clear direction towards which conversion mode they prefer. When we are looking at mid-core, we see that they are clearly more leaning towards the revenue. And I mean, the explanation is it should be pretty clear, right? As Midcore are more oriented into IAP revenue, and they have a different strategy of measuring. And also, when we look on the attribution window, it's different with Midcore games. They actually, not all of them, or not as significant majority as with casual and hyper casual, are looking at the default 24 hours, but they are using also 48 hours and 72 hours to give the user more time basically to do the first purchase. Cool. Now, actually, this is just an example of different funnels that we saw and different frequently used events that are measured. So there are obviously, each one of you probably is doing, whoever is doing funnel is doing it a bit differently, but when it comes to gaming, looking at which level is reached, e-com, the time from the time you saw the actual product till the time you made the purchase, and when it's finance, so sign up or registering till you did an actual, monetary event, depositing money, lending money, etc. Cool. The second section is going to be about media mix. Basically, we're going to look at the share of the media sources by type. So we cannot really say, this is the share of Meta or this is the share of someone else. But Mariusz did allow us to talk about Google. I see Mariusz is not here, so we can even, yeah. Yes, starting with finance. So it's not a surprise when it comes to non-gaming. The SRNs are the leading source of users for this. We're going to see it in finance and e-com now, and there are many ways to explain it. I think that the most obvious reason is that when it comes to finance apps, basically they have a lot of sensitive information about us, and they are less open to try untraditional media sources. However, we do see that they are trying more to implement ad networks. And I think that if we had time and if it was possible, and we would look in the subcategory level, so we would see, for example, that banks and traditional banks, digital banks, are more leaning towards those SRNs, while cryptocurrencies, investments, and lending will try more ad networks. When it comes to e-com, so it's pretty clear, right? They don't use ad networks and DSPs as much. Again, I'm reminding you, I'm looking at top apps, and I'm not looking at a wider range of, the data sample is not that wide. And I think that, first of all, we can see that Google has been growing with e-com apps for the past year or so. There are different explanations to that. Also, Google has improved a lot in their intent data, and also, and we're going to talk about remarketing a bit later, but in late 2021, with all the changes happening in Meta, so a lot of advertisers moved budgets to Google, especially for remarketing. But then Google got a better focus. And gaming, it's a completely different world. Ad network are holding the majority of the traffic. Only a third of the traffic is coming from SRNs. And I think that when we talk about gaming and the relationship between gaming and ad networks, we see that ad networks are very easily to make changes within the product to fit different gaming needs. I mean, the ship is moving a bit easier to both sides, while it's harder to get the same engagement from the leading SRNs. And this is one of the reasons that ad networks will still prefer. There are many reasons, right? And I think we talked about it earlier, but this is one of the main reasons. Budgets, you want to talk about budgets?
Sure. So there's absolutely no surprise that budgets follow the performance. But I think the interesting part is when we look at the last year and we compare the Android and iOS. I think in Android, definitely we see that Google is still king when it comes to finance and e-com. It might be very well that as what we saw prior to Scan, what we saw on iOS, a big uplift when people were still buying traffic that you can attribute to the IDFA. Again, it's no secret that the Android privacy sandbox comes in, and we definitely see that as well when we look at the attribution of the budgets. Still, when it comes to actual getting the great performance, Google is very high up there, also due to the inventory. For finance and ecom, it's definitely the key. Gaming has been historically always a bit more, let's call it diverse when it comes to the media networks, and exactly that's where the budgets come in too. Again, if you have more questions about specific subcategories in gaming, we are happy to talk about them after the presentation. Now on iOS. iOS, again, quite a different story when it looks at the budget mix. Definitely the social and SRNs have a very high share in finance. That being said, probably as you saw a couple of slides back, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are more installs, right? It's also a little bit about the efficiency that you can acquire traffic from. Uh, sorry about that. And exactly this, what can also affect how much you can get out of those SRNs. Exactly when it comes to the ecom, again, here Google has a very strong position. We believe when we look at the split between the installs as well as the retargeting, again, Google's capabilities of retargeting have a pretty strong impact when it comes to the e-commerce apps. And then gaming, I mean, it's fair to say that one of the biggest winners when it comes to the iOS and scan change were the ad networks, who definitely saw a very big uplift when it comes to budgets and cost of campaigns. When you look at it year over year, when it comes to the UA budget strategy, I think the interesting part here, when we're analyzing the data, is that those changes were pretty drastic compared to the years before. It is, of course, due to the fact that that ATT consent or lack of this consent really affected how the budgets were shifted. Just for the record, we're looking here at Q1 2022 compared to the Q1 this year. As you can see, definitely it's worth noting that for gaming there was the ad networks. For when it comes to the Android, Google increased a lot. They managed to capture quite a lot of budgets from other SRNs. And what's funny, looking at finance, the DSP has a quite big increase, but full transparency, the DSP's absolute value was quite low before that. So the percentage increase year over year is high. Doesn't mean it's a big part of the mix. Moving to the last part of the presentation, when it looks at the user behaviors, what I think is a positive sign for all of us. It was a long year, 2022, when it comes to actual number of paying users, right? The in-app purchases. Each month is normalized to January, so we could see from the January last year there was quite a sharp drop, and then a slow but steady recovery. In December last year, we're almost at the same stage as in January 2022 when it comes to the share of paying users. The good news is when we look at the data also for 2023, we can confirm this trend is still maintaining. So actually, people are back spending money into the apps and games. So overall, we hope that this will continue to go this path. As a add-on, I think the interesting part is to look at the average number of purchases. When you look at the last 3 months, it was basically 2.4 for ecom and 3.9 for gaming. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Those are the main verticals. Sub verticals, of course, might differ. If you wonder why there's no finance, finance doesn't really operate on the in-app purchases, as you know, rather on the events, which kind of follows what Igal said about custom and encode and events and funnel. Now, very interesting part. So it's come to remarketing, right? That was one of the main fears when the scan came in. What will happen to remarketing? We don't have an idea. We don't have someone that we can actually. Some campaigns will be not working. When we look at the Google and the other top media sources with the split, and this is also slightly affected by Facebook decision from Meta decision from October 2021 about restricting the view for the click data and actually then remarketing capabilities. Definitely, when we look at the Google in terms of the remarketing conversions, we see the increase. Obviously, there's also uplift in Q4, which is expected. It's quite seasonal.
Yeah, I also want to add that after the changes with Meta, different advertisers try to do different things. So moving into probabilistic and later on moving into different data clean room solutions. So there was the industry kind of adapted to the change of Meta. Okay.
Exactly. And the last, but also sometimes treated quite well. Not enough attention was being paid to owned media. I think before, when it was very easy just to put campaigns and just hopefully see a good result, and if not, deviate, is the owned media. Definitely something that has been used for e-commerce and finance app for a while. This is what we see, right? For it's a very fresh data. It's January and February. Definitely, the click to install ratio for the owned media is increasing quite a lot. We have those flagship examples like Coinbase in during the Super Bowl, when they just showed the QR code on television, people scanned it, and you got millions of installs. But obviously, the other very successful solutions is when it comes to web to app. So using, for example, Google paid traffic, lead it on the landing page, and then actually use one of the deep linking or smart link solutions to get into the app install.
Yeah, and also the biggest growth of on media, basically, from what we saw, started when COVID hit, and then different marketeers tried different solutions to what they knew so far, and then old media got a better stage, or the stage it should have gotten before.
Yes, and I think last it's more kind of just looking at the big picture. The whole issue is right now, as you probably know, the market is pretty mature. The app discovery option in the stores is not that great. So owned media is essentially a free way to actually increase that for the different channels. And that's exactly what we see when we look at the US and Europe, and for the top apps for iOS. Obviously, I won't be saying this out loud, but you can avoid the App Store tax with using Web to App or web things. Moving on.
Yeah, okay, so retention of paying users, this is actually something that Matti spoke about when it specifically for gaming a few months ago, but we decided to show it again also to basically present finance and ecom, and also because it's more updated. So basically what we did, we looked only at the paying users where the day of the payment is day zero, and then looked at how they are retained 30 days after the first purchase. And you know retention rates, and we are looking at retention rates for years, and they're not changing as much for years, but it's insane to see how high the retention rates of paying users. If we are looking at general retention rate that include paying and non-paying, so it can be 25 in day one and less than 10 in day 30. And these are the users that you are optimizing to, and these are the users that you want to be retained. And you can check your own retention of paying users and compare it to the benchmark and see where you stand, if you are better or not. Yeah. The last data point that we're going to talk about is uninstall, and kind of showing what is the difference between gaming and non-gaming. And I think that when it comes to why the difference, or why the churn rate in gaming is so higher, is basically because you have the variety is much bigger, the supply is much bigger, the commitment of the user to the game is not as high as a user that is connected to his bank or to the way that he's transferring money, or even to the app that he buys his shoes from. And that's why we see that the percentage is much higher when it comes to uninstall rate. Yeah, I think that.
Oh, yeah. So with the key takeaways, we talk with Vigal that we hate key takeaways because I think for everyone it's something else. But if we can just put it in the three main points, is basically, well, this is in a full-fledged now, the age of privacy. Scan is nowhere to go. Actually, Scan 4.0 is already released. It will also join the media sources. So please do not deviate from actually experimenting with the conversion value mapping. Try to see what works for you. As you can see, there's no silver bullet. It really depends on the business model. And still, iOS users bear the most revenue, however you want to dissect it, when you look at the global benchmarks. Then obviously, media mix fluctuates. That's the beauty of being the UA manager, finding those pockets of growth. I think when we try to discuss it and see what can be interesting for the e-commerce finance, is don't be shy and learn from gaming. I think the gaming advertisers, from what we see, tend to experiment more. And actually, again, it could be due to competition, but basically make sure to exchange those insights, because it can bring really fantastic results if you can find the media source that wasn't really tapped into by your competition. And the last point, which I think is also extremely important when we look at the general grim outlook of the last year, is that the share of paying users is increasing across all verticals. So that's also a big hope that basically this worst time when it comes to actually in-app purchases, the revenue generated from that is down there, and we hope that that it will continue with this trend. All? Okay, and the most important part, obviously you went through a lot of data slides here. So as a reward, we would love to invite you for a happy hour tomorrow. So if you haven't registered, please do register. It's at the Connoisseur Vodka Museum. It's tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Super.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the really, really amazing insights. We have few questions. Perfect. I assume these are attached to the theme. So we'll go through some of the previously asked questions, and we'll have a little bit of time for live audience questions as well. We have about 5-6 minutes. So the first one, how do you track uninstalls on iOS?
I'll take it. Yeah. So basically, it's a good question because we are only exposed to some data, right? We are not exposed to anything, and the uninstall rate that we presented is only what we are exposed to. So obviously, if we have no access to it, so we cannot guess. And generally, when we measure uninstall rate, so we kind of look at which user is not coming back for after a specific threshold, and then we count it as a user that is churned.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Second question. Is the higher consent rate in developing countries maybe because Apple didn't run massive pro-privacy campaigns there across TV, digital, and print?
I can take this one. So we believe there is actually, it's very hard then to tell is one causation because of the higher consent rates. I think that it's a mix of different factors. So definitely the savviness in the data, when you look at the Datenschutz policy in Germany and the GDPR and COPPA, definitely play a role here. Still, we strongly believe that there's a very much higher trust when it comes to the app providers in the developing countries. It has to be connected with such things as internet connection, access to the institutions in those countries. So in general, we see that it's the trend that definitely is basically prevailing. It doesn't really change. But at the same time, I think it's multiple different factors that can affect that.
I also want to add that in developing countries, and not all users are necessarily, they weren't exposed to what we were exposed when it came to cookies on web or the awareness to privacy and what it means. So this is also another reason for the high consent rate.
Yes, and last thing, because it's a very important question here. We also see sometimes a reverse trend, basically, also what you saw for e-commerce. If you don't accept or like you decide not to share the IDFA, obviously you want to get a personalized retargeting ads. So the question is, what's also better for the user when it comes to experience, right? If you want to see a very not relevant ads, or actually when it comes to the matching your past purchases and the campaigns that you'll be shown to. So there's also a trade-off, and I think as an industry, it's our job to actually educate those users. That's not necessarily a bad thing to give this consent within.
We should have asked them to do a survey like how many are consenting or not consenting.
Next time.
Super, thank you. So next question, how does ATT opt-in rate differ per game subgenre? I'm assuming that's what I meant. Are you observing higher rates on more casual or more core titles?
I think that's a question that we need another presentation for, because I mean it really differentiates and it has a lot of factors, and I cannot just answer it with like this. I'm sorry.
That's for networking evening conversation. Yeah. Perfect. You mentioned total apps are 145. How many are game apps? Yes, picking data sources.
Yeah,
nice.
no problem. So it's about 50 gaming apps.
Cool, thank you. And then we had the last edition 2 minutes ago. Is any network ready for SCAD4?
Yes, there are a couple of networks that are ready for SCAD4. I was actually talking about it just before we came. We have a solution architect that is sitting over there, and he can elaborate more. But yes, there are networks that are already testing, and yeah, it's going to happen soon.
Yes, but I think it's also worth adding that it's good to start thinking about it, how you can use the free separate conversion windows and get the conversion value mapping. But definitely the critical mass hasn't been reached, right? So it's still up and coming product, but something that we can expect in the next months.
Right. We can also we can talk about it later after the presentation or in the evening about what are the differences between current scan and scan 4. There are many differences, and it's going to be very interesting.
Awesome. So we have 2 more minutes for live questions. So who's going to make me run? If there are any. Going once. Oh, yes, perfect.
Thank you very much. How do you see the future of user acquisition? So, like, what should be changed in the world with metaverse, with Web3, NFT, and you as a big guys, you definitely should see a trends. What we should expect in 5 years?
I'll go first because I don't know it, so so then Igal can continue. I think it's honestly I really hate when someone says that, oh, this is going to be exactly like this. I think we saw it in the last couple of years that is basically trying, iterating. What I can tell from the gaming end when it comes to measurement attribution, shameless plug. Also when it comes to actually the cross-platform, especially when it comes to Steam. It's so much cheaper to actually publish sometimes on Steam than right now on the App Store. And PC and console and apps, basically consolidation when it comes to UA is definitely on the way. We're testing that with quite a couple of our main partners and clients. However, when it comes to metaverse and basically adding additional layers to that, it's a good question. What would be the identifier that would allow us then to map it? Would it be a wallet ID, like some of the? But again, I think it's also a beer discussion after this.
I also want to add that at the end of the day, there are few companies that have an impact on where your user acquisition is going. AppsFlyer is also trying to be one of them, and also trying to be first in many things. And I think that someone was talking about as a presentation earlier, and it's a lot about looking what others are doing and try to try new things yourself. The world is going to be, it's already very privacy centric, and this is something that we should take in mind with every decision that we are making forward, if it's a user acquisition, remarketing, or anything else.
Super. Thank you very much. And that is time.